Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar organized by Psychosocial Wednesday. My name is Stefano Carpani. I'm here with Berna von Guretsky and Ludmila Osterman. We are the gang behind Psychosocial Wednesday since this year. Let me remind you what Psychosocial Wednesdays are or is. More than a century ago, Freud gathered colleagues for Wednesday meetings that opened the world of psychoanalysis to a wide range of powerful ideas. Psychosocial Wednesday are modeled on those Wednesday and on Jung's meetings at the Psychological Club. And future speakers from various psychoanalytical traditions, schools, and associated fields. 2023, our fourth season, will focus on the process of individuation, termed as freedom after freedom, in an individualized society and liquid society. Once a month, a scholar will present a theme and later discuss it with the audience. The purpose of Psychosocial Wednesdays and our webinar is to bring Jungian and neo-Jungian themes to a wider and international audience. I'm very, very happy to have with us Dr. Roula Maria Dibb for different reasons. First, because she's an amazing author, poet, and neo-Jungian, if I can call you neo-Jungian. Second, because tonight she will talk about her contribution to my book, Freedom After Freedom, which I published last year. So I'm very, very happy that she will be able to talk about individuation, textuality, and sexuality in Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia. I will not say much about the abstract of her paper or contribution tonight, but I would like to share with you bits of her amazing CV. Roula Maria is the director of the London Arts-Based Research Centre, the founding editor of literary and arts journal Indelible, and creative producer of literary event series Indelible Evenings, as well as Psy-Creative, a virtual salon for researchers and creatives with a background in Jungian psychology. She's a holder of the UK Global Talent Visa as an award-winning literary scholar, poet, educator, and editor, and a recipient of the British Council Alumni Award 2021-2022 for the Culture and Creativity category in the UAE, and the American University in Dubai's Provost Award for Outstanding Literary Achievement 2020. Her book, Jungian Metaphor in Modernist Literature, published by Routledge in 2020, was shortlisted as a finalist for the International IAJS Book Award, and poems from her collection, Simply Being, Chiron 2021, were nominated for the Pushcart Prize. I hope I pronounce it correctly. MOOC, Why Online Creative Communities Matter, is featured on academia.eu. Formerly, until June 2022, she was a professor of English at the American University in Dubai. And I hope we can share it. I wanted to share it tonight, but it's not published yet. She is, let's say, poetry director or editor of poetry for Jungianeum, a new publication that I'm trying to put in this Jungian world and hopefully will come up very soon. So, Roula Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for the introduction. And it is truly an honor for me to be here with everyone. And thank you for all that you do for neo-Jungians everywhere. Dr. Carpani, we can say now. And I think many of you know this, but just in case, I am not a therapist. My interest in analytical psychology comes purely through a literary standpoint. So my aim in so many things that I do is to bring and use and develop Jungian theory in literature and creativity. You know, it's heartwarming to see that there are so many poets and writers increasingly being interested in neo-Jungianism and Jungian theory in general, because it applies so much to the creative fields in all of its forms. So without further ado, I'm going to present a bit about my chapter in Stefano's lovely book. So here it is. And yeah, could you see it now? Okay, I'm gonna, yeah. All right, so the chapter is called Individuation, Textuality, and Sexuality in Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia. And as many of you know, the Aeneid is a tale about heroes. And when we say heroes, we usually say men, just as we are used to hearing about epics, Greek epics, and other types of epics of long ago. And Ursula Le Guin, again, as many of you might know, had an interest in Jungian theory. And although she didn't speak about it per se all the time, but she kind of used Jungian practices in her writing. And I see her Lavinia as an attempt to rewrite the Aeneid, but from the perspective of Lavinia, as a mode of giving Lavinia and women a bit of freedom through literature and through active imagination. So Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia is a novel about freedom via the process of creative, imaginative writing as much as it is about Lavinia the heroine, as opposed to Lavinia the shadow, who appeared in the background of Virgil's Aeneid. The novel is about the freedom and existence granted to heroes and heroines, and it reveals how liberty and reality lies in fantasy and fiction. It doesn't matter to the author whether Lavinia had actually ever existed historically, because the way we know her is through the medium of text, through the Aeneid, the epic that is all about heroes of war, in which she is merely a silent character. Her existence is confined within the lines of the poem, and Virgil had invented her, or had he? We ask. According to Lavinia, the novel, Virgil had sat down at a table, started to write, and she came to him of her own accord. This is one thing about which Le Guin has always been quite clear, that imaginative storytelling, when properly done, is a process of exploration and discovery, not that of goal-directed making. It is what Jung and the post-Jungians call active imagination, which, as I will argue, paves the way for different freedoms through textual sluices. I'm going to give an overall summary of the novel, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the carrier bag theory of Ursula Le Guin. And hello, Susan. I'm going to be using some ideas from your book, C.G. Jung and the Humanities. In the carrier bag theory of fiction, Le Guin suggests that the earliest form of art and culture is the story. Le Guin speculates on the possibility of having two original cultural tales, that of the more masculine heroic spear, war stories, patriarchic stories, and that of the carrier bag, where unassociated things are put together like characters in a story, rendering the sack as ultimately behind the literary form of the novel, a form distinguished by relationships between characters. Now, not only does the novel Lavinia originate in a feminine, eros-charged carrier bag of the heroine, but so does her kingdom, Lavinia, the name of her kingdom, and its culture. More interestingly, the novel shows how the advent of Lavinium is not prophesied by an oracle, but rather by a poet, which is a very interesting point that Ursula Le Guin comes from. She starts from. In the novel, the author makes a love offering to the female character who is almost forgotten in the Aeneid, but who also makes a return away from the meek and demure diffidence that the epic poem labeled her with. In the novel, narrated by the heroine herself, Lavinia, the heroine, first appears as a young teenage princess living in Latium with her loving father, King Latinus, and her emotionally unstable mother, Queen Amata, both of whom she refers to by their first names. So there's no mom and dad, there's Amata and Latium in the novel. Lavinia is an independent girl endowed with the gift of prophecy, which she inherited from her father. Thus, she is assigned with performing and leading the palace's daily religious tasks. In the beginning of the novel, Latium had been quite peaceful and war-free. So the princess would roam around freely, traveling to the sacred forest called Albunea, with only one of her maids, for receiving prophetic visions. Lavinia continuously refuses her suitors, including her arrogant cousin Turnus, whom her mother is deeply obsessed with. However, on one night spent in Albunea, Lavinia has in a vision in which she sees Virgil, and she engages in a series of conversations with him about her life, according to the Aeneid. The poet warns her about the impending war with the Trojans, and she accepts the fact that she will be married to a foreigner, the Trojan warrior Aeneas, until he dies 3 years later. After their first encounter, Lavinia and Virgil meet a few times before his quote-unquote death. He had traveled to the distant past to tell her about her life. So that's how she saw him, when he traveled to the past. And more details are told and created as the worlds of both the poet and the heroine intertwine. During this time, Virgil is surprised at how much of an unkept promise Lavinia turns out to be, referring to how unjustly the poem had portrayed her. After much of what the poem states happens with Lavinia, her brief but happy marriage with Aeneas results in a son, and both live under the corrupt rule of Aeneas' older son, Ascanius, who threats to take Lavinia's son away from her after the death of his father. To escape Ascanius' control, Lavinia and her son then decide to seek freedom by going into self-imposed exile in the forest for a few years, after which her son becomes a wise, just, and graceful king. Now, from epic to novel, Lavinia lives her own poem as she creates it and becomes aware of it through her encounters with Virgil. Unlike her voiceless, barely palpable existence in the Aeneid, she's given a voice and presence, in which she says, "If you'd met me when I was a girl at home, you might well have thought that my poet's faint portrait of me, sketched as if with a brass pin on a wax tablet, was quite sufficient. A girl, a king's daughter, a marriageable virgin, chaste, silent, obedient, ready to a man's will, as a field in spring is ready for the plow." In the beginning, upon her first stepping out of the poem version and into the novel, Lavinia seems to be limited by the boundaries of her own destiny, drawn by Virgil in the Aeneid, which is mainly the story of Aeneas. In the novel, Lavinia's encounters with Virgil help her speak and create her own destiny through her vivid, active imagination. Virgil confesses that the unconfined quality of her existence is not bound to the lines of the poem. "That's not where it ends for you, Lavinia," he says. Perhaps this is a hint at the continuity of her life through the liberating format of the novel. In order to achieve this liberating function, Le Guin weaves the story in non-conventional form by including the element of active imagination, offering the heroine a unique dimension of possibilities become worlds. Lavinia is given life in an alternative form of writing, mirroring an alternative form of reality. So, I intend to show that the freedom given to the female protagonist within this new dimension is the product of vivid active imagination, textual individuation, and the realm of possibilities rendered by the combination of reality, surreality, and possibilities within the novel's quantum-like structure. In the beginning of the novel, Lavinia states, "And yet, my part of them, the life he gave me in his poem, is so dull, except for one moment when my hair catches fire, so colorless except when my maiden cheeks blush like ivory stained with crimson dye, so conventional. I can't bear it any longer. If I must go on existing century after century, then once at least I must break out and speak. He didn't let me say a word. I have to take the word from him. He gave me a long life, but a small one. I need room, I need air." Indeed, Lavinia is referring to the Aeneid, which is a patriarchic celebration of the victories of male heroes in war, told by a man and about men, just as we said about the spear stories earlier. It is also the original home of Lavinia's existence. She says, "No doubt someone with my name, Lavinia, did exist, but she may have been so different from my own idea of myself, or my poet's idea of me, that it only confuses me to think about her. As far as I know, it was my poet who gave me any reality at all." Lavinia the novel is a rewriting and redemption of this silenced feminine in the epic, with the heroine who is aware of this redemptive act. The new form is an attempt at redeeming a history told through fiction, but this time focusing on a different kind of truth hidden in a different kind of action. According to Mark Slavin, when it is revisioned in terms of the poetic basis of mind, fiction becomes the condition of possibility for case history. The imaginal becomes the a priori of the historical. It does not ensconce itself as noumena, but in quasi-transcendental or deliteralized sense, as different, the border of unfolding phenomena. So what happens with Lavinia, as well as Le Guin, through Virgil, the poet, is a revisioning, also in terms of the poetic basis of mind, that offers possibilities for a resurfacing of a history suppressed through silence. And fiction is a new hosting environment for history, or rather, herstory. Lavinia's imaginal realm of story-making was indeed, as Slavin would call it, the border of unfolding phenomena. Perhaps it would help to look more closely at the history of story-making within early societies in Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory. Le Guin reflects on the way stories have molded the patriarchal perspective on the origins of culture. She mentions that hunting, traditionally a male role, has left many artifacts such as the spear being one of the earliest tools used by humans. With the spear culture comes a legacy of stories, teeming with details of excitement and male heroism. But Le Guin asks, are these the only types of stories that emerge from the earliest forms of culture? She invites her readers to think more deeply about humanity's first artifacts and visualize two types of stories rather than just the hunting-related ones, namely the ones stemming from the gathering tradition. She suggests that people have probably invented other tools way before the spear. A leaf, a gourd shell, a net, a bag, a sling, a sack, a bottle, a pot, a box, a container, a holder, a recipient, she says. She proposes that parallel to the spear would probably be another invention, the carrier bag, which definitely does not elicit as many tales of drama, danger, and excitement as the spear. However, known for encasing and nurturing many unrelated things together, the diversity of objects inside a carrier bag is like the making of a novel, where characters are also homed together in one text. The natural, proper, fitting shape of the novel might be that of a sack, a bag. A book holds words. Words hold things. They bear meanings. A novel is a medicine bundle, holding things in a particular, powerful relation to one another, and to us, she says. They bear meanings. A novel is a medicine bundle, holding things in a particular, powerful relation to one another, and to us, again, she says. The carrier bag is the Eros version of the Logos spear, says Susan Rowland. Telling history through the Aeneid's spear story model is a telling of the battles and heroes. A reductionist approach, Le Guin seeks to revise through Lavinia, which is like the carrier bag. Lavinia's story, however, in its novel form, shows us that conflicts are not everything. And the overemphasis on details of the battles and heroes has muffled the voice and existence of the princess in the Aeneid. The silence of Lavinia in the Aeneid is the suppression of those tales of being that appear in the novel, which tells about wars, but also about people, showing how one relationship among elements in the novel may well be that of conflict, but the reduction of narrative to conflict is absurd. Instead of being the warrior here, Lavinia, as a heroine, is the girl whom wars were fought for, the nobody that everybody was fighting a war about, according to what the heroine says in the novel. Active imagination is a way of improving and enhancing individuation, which we can see the novel doing with Lavinia. Myth-like in its archetypal manifestations, with its plot and characters, it is an active dialogue and relationship with the Aeneid, the performance of a living conversation between Lavinia and Virgil. It is a self-realization of the heroine through the textual space she is offered by the writer. Le Guin creates this effect by practicing this form of active imagination while allowing the text to come to life, bringing the characters along with it and letting them perform their own active imagination through the conversations between Lavinia and Virgil. In doing so, the author endows the text with its own autonomy. Her claim that she was rewriting along Virgil, but the novel itself seemed to wake up to its own life. She says, "My desire was to follow Virgil, not to improve or reprove him, but Lavinia herself sometimes insisted that the poet was mistaken about some details, about the color of her hair, for instance. Lavinia, freed in Le Guin's Textuality, has emerged in the autonomy allowed by her active imagination, that she performed as a character. Le Guin, by disclaiming the text and its details as her own property, simply starts freeing the heroine, an act of active imagination in itself, where the image, in this case Lavinia, has its own autonomy. By not owning the ideas in the novel, and by handing it over to Lavinia, Le Guin is not only presenting Lavinia as engaging in active imagination with the poet, but the author goes even further in showing how she herself has, like her protagonist, engaged in this practice too, in perceiving the novel as a separate entity she engages with. This again echoes Susan Rowland. In effect, treat the image as the text of another, a missive from the unknown, unconscious psyche. Eventually, the image, with its overwhelming affect, will truly show itself to be alive. Acting true to its autonomous, archetypal nature, it will move, expand, breathe, develop, and may even speak. But how does Lavinia start the active imagination process? It starts with her gift, which often annoyed her mother. I'm quoting Lavinia now. My mother's anger was chafed by the idea that I had some gift like my father's of conversation with the spirits. It gave me a kind of uncanny importance, which she despised. I agreed with her in my heart. The importance was false, but the gift was real, and it was useful to me as my reason not to be always at home, dressed in white, the meek, garlanded sacrifice, while the suitors paraded through and drank their wine, and Turnus flattered my mother and laughed with my father and looked at me as the butcher looks at the cow. Lavinia, filled with this emotional distress, dread, and sense of entrapment, because of her mother's madness and obsession with marrying her daughter to her own relative, finally finds her own projection in Albunea, a sacred space in the forest where the gifted like herself may receive visions. Her vision came in the image of Virgil as a dying poet, an incarnation of her own feelings. Albunea is where Lavinia prepares her mind to enter its imaginal space, during the time when her conscious mind is quieted and focused, allowing her ego to receive the guiding message from her unconscious. This is when Virgil becomes alive and real, enabling Lavinia to relate to him productively. Her active imagination comes into play when it develops a relationship with an image that manifests part of the unknown and uncontrollable psyche, in other words, a symbol. From the beginning of the novel, Lavinia makes the link between Albunea and freedom. She says, the walk, there was an escape to, a time of freedom. Her life in the castle, despite her father's doting on love, was a form of imprisonment for her. It was a place to stay until she is handed over to another suitor. However, Lavinia resorts to her special gift. All I wanted when I went there was to sleep there, in that silence, with freedom and Albunea, those spirits around me in the numen of Albunea. A night there clarified my heart and quieted my mind so that I could come back home and do my duty. Now, during her retreat, the silent maiden of the Aeneid merges with the silence of Albunea, where she discovers the language of the archetypes within. She says, I watched the light grow reddish across the misty pools and listened to the troubled voice of the water. After a while, I moved farther up the hill, where I could hear birds singing near and far in the silence of the trees. The presence of the trees was very strong. For the first time, I wondered if I might hear the voice that my father heard speak from among them in the dark. The big oaks stood so many, so massive in their other life, in their deep-rooted silence. The awe of them came on me, the religion. So visions became meditations upon images for her, with the appearance of Virgil. There are many layers of dreams here, being unfolded to unravel the textual existence of Lavinia through the poet's imagination. At the same time, this existence is mirrored with that of the poet, who also appears to be a projection, a vision, whom Lavinia engages into conversations with. Virgil tells her that imagination is a whole world, one parallel to the one she was experiencing. but it is not a world of definite and determined details. Perhaps it never did, never will happen. You should not be concerned about it. I made it up. I imagined it. A dream within a dream, he tells her, within the dream that has been my life. This is active imagination, again, in the making, in the poet's brief explanation of his meditation upon an image, which simultaneously is what Lavinia also does. She is meditating on the image of the poet and engaging with it, bringing this unconscious element into consciousness, which is the projected image of Virgil, for the unconscious appears in projected and symbolized form, as there is no other way by which it might be perceived. Lavinia's active imagination opens the door to the world of possibilities that grants her some form of freedom. She says, so my mind ran from possibility to possibility like a hare dodging hounds, while the three old women, the fates, spun out the measured thread of what was to be. Lavinia does not want determined outcomes. She's intrigued by the idea that the poet is not a prophet, not an oracle, and she wants a different type of relationship with him, since he does not dictate her life to her or give her the final outcome of her destiny. Instead, her life unravels through her conversations with him. He asks her, I'm searching for my duty here. How much is it right for me to tell you? Do you want to know your future, Lavinia? To which Lavinia answers, I want to know what's right to do, but I don't want to know what's to come of it. This is the beginning of Lavinia's individuation, and she is ready to explore it with all its unfolding possibilities. By going to Albinea on dark, starless nights, Lavinia delves into the depths of her unconscious, or as Jung may call it, the nocturnal side of the psyche, and sets up communication with it. She says, he sat up straighter, there on the dark ground, a shadow among shadows, and began to sing. There was no tune to it. Its words were all the music of it. Its words were its drum beat, clack of the loom, tread of feet, oar stroke, heartbeat, waves breaking on the beach at Troy, away across the world. This is what Robert A. Johnson would or might call a balancing act, where we find a constant flow of energy and information between the two levels as they meet in the dimension of dream, vision, ritual, and imagination. Lavinia's trips to the forest are a journey towards her visionary experiences, which are a conscious engagement with her unconscious through, again, active imagination. She says, I sat talking with a shadow, a dying man who had not yet been born and who knew my past and my future and my soul, who knew who it was that I should marry, the true hero. And he said that perhaps he had imagined it, that it was a dream within a dream. And I had imagined it. It had not happened. It would not happen. False dreams, visions, follies. Le Guin's active imagination is very much alive through the character of Virgil, too. For she, too, not only narrates Lavinia's life, she meets her, meditates upon her image, and gets to know her better as the story moves forward. The initial portrayal of Lavinia as a minor character of the Aeneid is limiting and inaccurate, manifested by the patriarchic gaze, like that of Turnus, her cousin suitor, that favors battles. Turnus would certainly have recognized the poet's portrait of me as a shrinking, silent maiden, she says. Through the character of Virgil in the novel, however, the author gets to know Lavinia better and discovers features that were previously unknown. She allows the novel to portray the princess more accurately. This is expressed by Virgil in the novel. I know very little, and what I thought I knew of you, what little I thought of at all, was stupid, conventional, unimagined. I thought you were a blonde. But you can't have two love stories in an epic. Where would the battles fit? In any case, how could one possibly end a story with marriage? What shows here is the reality of people and characters in active imagination. It is an autonomous reality, one that is independent from the poet's imagination. For as Jung claims in his 1935 Tavistock lectures, active imagination, as the term denotes, means that the images have a life of their own and that the symbolic events develop according to their own logic. This is another facet of the freedom Lavinia is given through active imagination and the text. As a living textual entity, she is able to have a complete life of her own, surprising even her maker or makers, in this case, the poet and the author. The active imagination of Lavinia, as well as Le Guin in writing the novel, is an act of freeing the heroine from the silent bonds of the epic poem. Though all my poet sang was true and is true, she says, yet there are small mistakes in the truth of it, and I have tried to mend those tiny rents in the great fabric as I tell my part in it. By mending through her own telling of the story, Lavinia refers to the reformative structure of the novel. The guiding voice of the vision is not that of an oracle, but that of a poet, Virgil, who tells but does not in any way dictate Lavinia about her life. It was the poet who spoke. It was all the words of the poet, she says, the words of the maker, the foreteller, the truth-teller, nothing more, nothing less. But was I myself any more or less than that? She asks. The sense of the supernatural or divine in the novel lies in the poet, not in the gods governing the wars and male heroes as in the epic. And while the heroine's character is presented differently in the novel than it was in the Aeneid, the most striking aspect of the novel is not her character, but her conversations with her maker, Virgil. Lavinia's acceptance of her destiny is what helps her become creatively involved with it, freeing her in the resulting story. Her assent is testimony to her creative engagement in active imagination, which leads to her internalization and articulation of experience, but textually. With this acquiescence, Lavinia takes a very important step. As the first step in engaging the transcendent function, the ego turns to the unconscious with an open and receptive attitude. The creative power of active imagination also appears when Virgil uses the term invent, as he refers to Camilla, a warrior princess, in one of his poems. I suppose I did invent her, but I liked her, he said. Lavinia asks him astonishingly, invent her? To which he answers, I am a poet, Lavinia. The answer pleases Lavinia and suddenly gives her the epiphanic connection between poetry and prophecy. She says, I liked the sound of the word, but he saw I did not know it. Avates, he said. I knew that word, of course. A foreteller, a soothsayer. Virgil automatically replaces the oracle and is actually referred to as an oracle by the people of Lavinium later in the novel. They say, an oracle has spoken, a promise has been given. If you defy the voice that guides us, if you break the treaty I made, you do wrong. On the fantasy process, or active imagination, Jung mentions that we have to conceive of these processes not as immaterial phantoms we readily take fantasy pictures to be, but as something corporeal, a subtle body, a semi-spiritual in nature. This was the portrayal of the poet in Lavinia. He was a vision, but one that is a mix between the ethereal and physical. Virgil was a summoning of worlds, a psychoid phenomenon, an unconscious content made conscious and real in the empirical sense. Lavinia describes him this way. He was there, the shadow. He stood between me and the altar. His tall form was vague in the gray starlight. The nod of a head is such a small thing. It can mean so little, yet it is the gesture of assent that allows, that makes to be. The nod is the gesture of power. The yes, the noumen, the presence of the sacred, is called by its name. So he was a shadow. And like the dark Albanea night, symbolized unconscious content. But he had a physical form, along with so much authority and power assigned to its materialized movements. Virgil becomes the noumenal made present, which is a sacred power that is able to guide and create Lavinia's destiny. She asks him, wait, only tell me your poem, my poem. Did you finish it? He seemed to nod, but I could hardly see him, she says, a tall shadow in shadows. So there was an answer there within Lavinia, and there was a destiny and presence still in the making because she cannot see the answer clearly in the image, but it had to be freed from within her own self in order to project in front of her. The poet himself, simultaneously being Lavinia's projected inner image and the mouthpiece of Guin, expresses his desire for redemption and freedom. The Aeneid did not give the whole picture of Lavinia, who was buried within verse, unfinished and incomplete. Through her practice of active imagination during her nights at Albinea, however, the poet asks her to return. "Oh, my dear," he said, still very softly, "my unfinished, my incomplete, my unfulfilled child I never had, come back once more." "I will," she says. Her story must expand and continue within new lines, out of the patriarchic form of the epic, which, as mentioned earlier, is mainly concerned with tales of male heroes in battle. The space allowed in the novel is not a matter of format, of breaking from the tradition based on the hunter's craft and turning to the carrier-back culture, the culture that is more of a recipient, away from the botulism of the epic hero culture, as noted by Virginia Woolf. Moreover, Le Guin states that this break from the spear culture gives freedom to characters as people. It's clear that the hero does not look well in this bag. He needs a stage or a pedestal or a pinnacle. You put him in a bag and he looks like a rabbit, like a potato. That is why I like novels. Instead of heroes, they have people in them, she says. Textuality and existence. Lavinia learns to summon the dying poet, although he appears to her as a guest from the future in a past that existed before he was even born. So time is quite a confusing concept here. She becomes in contact with her inner guide, which later creates the wisdom that will free her from the clutches of Ascanius and the history of battles in verse, in which she barely had an existence. With time, this creates an awareness of her own textuality. She is guided by her poet and inner storyteller to continue her written life. After a long time, when the constellations had changed, she says, I spoke to the poet, not aloud, but in my mind. Dear poet, all you told me came to me. You guided me truly, up to Aeneas' death. Since then, I've let others lead me, but I go astray. I can't trust Ascanius. He doesn't know his own enmity to Silvius. I wish you were here to guide me now. I wish you could sing to me. Lavinia reflects on these two makers of her reality. In this case here, it juxtaposes her sexual and textual awakening at the same time. She asks, my question is, which of them did I more truly love? And I cannot answer it. One was my husband, the beautiful man whose flesh my flesh enclosed to make my son in me, the author of my womanhood, my pride, my glory. The other was a shadow, a whisper in shadows, a virgin's dream or vision, yet the other of all my being. How can I choose? I lost them both so soon. I knew them only a little better than they knew me. And I remember always that I am contingent. Continued. The makers left her, but Lavinia remained, existing and conscious enough to realize her own being. She says, in giving up my girl self and taking on the obligations of womanhood, I found myself freer than I had ever been. If I owed duty to my husband, it was very easy to pay. And as understandings grew between us and we came to trust each other, there were no restraints on me at all but those of religion and my duty to my people. I had grown up with those. They were part of me, not external, not enslaving, rather in enlarging the scope of my soul and mind. Sorry, I lost that. Oh. Okay, words and images drifted through my mind. The words were, speak me. Then they turned and seemed to reverse themselves as they drifted away. I say your being. I saw Aeneas' shield very clearly for an instant, the turn of the she-wolf's head to her bright flank. I felt myself lying on a vault like a turtle's shell of earth and stone that arched over a great dark hollow. So Lavinia ultimately becomes her own creator. Her practice of active imagination in Albinea was the first step towards this individuation, as her engagement with the poet is the initial step showing her integration of unconscious material with consciousness. When she had the poet with her, she had asked him to guide her, but not to tell her the result of her destiny. A chill of fear had come into me, she said. Too much was coming to me, too soon. I wanted the poet to tell me what was coming, and I didn't want it at the same time. She was ready for the journey and accepting of the forthcoming loss, pain, and violence as aspects of the world she is in. She did not strive in any way to avoid these harsh realities, but she knows how to bravely and freely act within them. She does not flee the patriarchic kingdom of her stepson Ascanius in the beginning, but instead continues to live within it, but with the authority and strength of piety of her voice. It was the voice of a princess, King Latinus's daughter, a queen, the wife of Aeneas, and later mother of King Silvius, and a gifted visionary. What makes her stand out is that she neither flees nor gives in to silence, but with the power of her visions strengthens her voice and overcomes the boundaries in her life. She dives in rather than out. She finds freedom during her own self-imposed exile. She chose her own destiny, and her conversations with the poet helped her discover that. She finally realizes this hidden freedom within. It was I who had the dream and heard the voice, she says. Now, within this unique dimension of possibilities offered by Le Guin's novel is a non-conventional form of fiction resembling the laws of quantum mechanics, bringing life and liberation to Lavinia through the novel's alternative forms of reality. Again, Susan, I'm quoting you one last time. Quantum experiments showed that the observer is always implicated in what is observed, and there is no separation. So by giving Lavinia a voice through the novel, and by giving Virgil a voice through Lavinia, the novel steps into different levels and dimensions of reality where the observer and the observed work together as one force. For example, Virgil working with Lavinia to continue the story, and Le Guin working with the voices of both in order to write her novel. So this creation of space or layers of space counters the problem of the positing of one level of reality as foundational to all others. Another thing about quantum mechanics, it states that the roots of matter lie in non-matter, which perhaps can be applied to the realm of storytelling and novel writing. This causal relationship then between matter and non-matter resembles Jung's theories on the relationship between psyche and matter, rendering the psyche as an important, highly advanced matter-forming technology. He says, the discovery of a realm of non-material forms which exist in the physical reality as the basis of the visible world makes it possible to accept the view that the archetypes are truly existing, real forms which can appear in our mind out of a cosmic realm in which they are stored. Thus, we can confirm here on the basis of the quantum phenomena Jung's view that it is not only possible, but fairly probable even, that psyche and matter are two different aspects of one and the same thing. And it is the revelation of the psychoid, the manifestation of this relationship between psyche and matter, which gave space for Lavinia's voice. It is through the quantum method of the author's active imagination, imposed on her protagonist as well, that a conversation with Virgil changed the level and perception of freedom that Lavinia had. Reading Lavinia from this perspective allows us to look more closely at the role of active imagination in writing the novel, which in itself is also about, and the result of, the active imagination of the heroine. The appearance of the invisible and numinous figure of Virgil is the most important factor in granting Lavinia the space and freedom she never had in the Aeneid. Analytical psychology, embodied in the archetype structure, leads us to the view that there is a part of the world that we can't see, a realm of reality that doesn't exist of material things, but of non-material forms. These forms are real, even though they are invisible, because they have the potential to appear in our mind and act in it. And if it is through these potentials that Lavinia's mind, voice, and life are expanded, then Le Guin here is a writer rather than an author. And the difference here is her own sense of observance, of being a witness, actually, witnessing what is happening rather than informing the readers by writing about what happens. Le Guin herself remarks that this story is in no way an attempt to change or complete the story of Aeneas. It is a meditative interpretation suggested by a minor character in his story, the unfolding of a hint. In this way, the structure of the novel is quite similar to the quantum mechanics, where also it is discovered that reality cannot be evaluated objectively. So Lavinia, rather than being a real shadow in the Aeneid, becomes a possibility that is actually freed and let loose and given its own life and autonomy. So Lavinia realizes the truth and dreams in the visionary. The things my poet had said to me came and went in my mind. Again, she says that. She shows the performative, life-giving aspect of writing, rather than the boundaries of authorship that come with a text. The poet is not an oracle. The writer is not an author. The poet, Virgil in this case, does not offer any finiteness to Lavinia's life or even her destiny, although he guides her through many of her life's major details. Virgil's intention is shown to have a limit. Lavinia's life is not dictated to her, but rather it is made by her through her conversations with Virgil's verse, rather than his prophecy, allowing the otherness of her existence to come through. The death of the poet is very significant of this, especially towards the end of the novel when he does not finish the story, and when Lavinia left to continue her life without him. But what am I to do now, she asks. I have lost my guide, my Virgil. I must go on by myself through all that is left after the end, all the rest of the immense, pathless, unreadable world. Her existence never ceases, although it changes form, and that is not done according to anything dictated by Virgil, but rather it is the evolution of her own being. She questions, what is left after a death? Everything else. The sun a man saw rise goes down, though he does not see it set. A woman sits down to the weaving, another woman left in the room. Finally, Le Guin does the same as Virgil in performing the story rather than simply writing about it. Through active imagination, she creates the novel form of the text in which Lavinia is allowed to speak. By this, Le Guin is showing her readers that what it takes for redemption is to create a character and hear her. This is the liberation offered by active imagination in rewriting, which in itself offers life and autonomy to this otherness. Lavinia's multidimensional, a vision, Le Guin's within a vision, and Lavinia's also vision within a vision. So there's the vision of Le Guin within Lavinia's vision, within Virgil's vision. It is a parallelizing of realities, a juxtaposition of eras and forms of existence. It is a quantum style in a way, which in itself is redemptive of the eros aspect of storytelling, asserting Le Guin's carrier bag theory. So to conclude, there's freedom in the novel's text, which, like Lavinia, has a life of its own. And as the poet says, well, my poem will look after itself, no doubt, if I let it. And at the end, Lavinia, Virgil, and Le Guin just let the poem be. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you so much, Roula Maria. Inspiring. I was right when asking you to be part of this edited book, and we were right asking you to be with us tonight. Really, really beautiful to hear that young Jungian voices are coming. I would like to ask you a personal question. It is, of course, not personal, but is how did you get to these? I hear an echo, so I go down. How did you get to this idea, the idea of this paper, the idea of this work, of this research? The initial poetical spark, perhaps.
I guess, as you will now realize, if you haven't done so already, but post-PhD, your reading habits change, and they change drastically.
Yeah.
And I love Le Guin's writing, and I enjoy reading science fiction in general. And with my somehow new reading habits, you find yourself taking notes of everything. And then by the end of the novel that you've read, you feel like, okay, so this could make a good paper. Why don't I explore this or that? And it leaves you with questions rather than answers. And it's kind of, the end of every novel is the beginning of a new adventure, of a new hunting for something. So yeah, I mean, just upon reading Lavinia, you get some thoughts, you get some ideas. Because I have a Jungian background, I saw a lot of active imagination in it. And when I read about Le Guin's journey with Lavinia, it all sounded like active imagination to me. She speaks about Lavinia as if it's somebody she knows very well, someone she has spoken to, and someone she got to know through writing the novel. So I felt that, these different spaces within the novel, these different layers, could have been spiked by the whole notion of performing the novel as active imagination, as Le Guin did.
Thank you. This is the moment that we open the floor to the audience. So please feel free to raise your electronic hand, not your real hand, because I cannot see 70 people on the screen. So please click on your electronic hand to ask your question to Roula Maria. And maybe if Susan is still here, yeah, she is here. You named her so many times, you quoted her so many times. She is an inspiration to you, to many.
Of course.
So,
And
Roland,
Susan's work, I mean, especially C.G. Jung in the humanities, and bringing in the idea of quantum physics and possibilities and the observer with the observed. And of course, Le Guin, too. Yeah, that was a huge inspiration. And I went to that book so many times as I was reading Lavinia, actually. So
from
thank you, Susan, for the
neo-Jungian,
inspiration as ever.
so from neo-Jungian to post-Jungians and the new ancestor. Susan, do you want to say something? Perhaps you want to unmute your mic.
Well, I really want to say something to you, Stefano, in that I'm not sure. I think we should put post-Jungian as a label that is a debate rather than a kind of settled status quo, because my work very much dips into Jung, and that's what Roula was drawing in. To Roula, I invite you simply to say something about the kind of hero that is being presented here. You did talk about this, but as you may be aware, that the notion of the hero is extremely toxic in American culture, and Le Guin is clearly aware of that, and her Lavinia is in many ways a response to that.
Yeah, I mean, the classical notion of the hero as someone who conquers, someone who beats somebody up and takes over is just not what Lavinia is. And the novel, Le Guin's novel, not only aims to show that, Lavinia is significant, but to show her as a hero, as someone who was actually able to individuate, to understand her own worth, to have visions and to create her own reality. This is what made her a hero. Her heroism kept her safe, but it never really let her beat Ascanius in any way. She did not lead any wars. She didn't kill anyone. She was quietly sitting in a house in the forest with her son. So she was more of an exile. She was definitely not on any battlefields, no spears or swords or any violence of any sort. But she was a hero because she changed and she unfolded. So in that sense, in the sense of unfolding herself, finding meaning, finding self, creating her own being rather than having it created for her, realizing the possibilities and the different channels that she can exist through. In my opinion, this is what showed her as a different kind of hero. So this is the Eros rather than the Logos hero.
Who would like to ask a question to Roula Maria from the audience? Please raise your electronic hand. Raymond.
Ray?
Yes, not so much a question, but a comment. It just so happens that I just finished a class on Chaucer's Troilus and Crusade, and what you present here is so similar to that I can't help but make a few comments on what I would call the feminization of patriarchal history, and that it seems as if we obviously need to look through the eyes of women and go back in the past and do that. And that seems, although I haven't read her novel, it seems that is what she's doing. The interesting thing about Troilus and Crusade, and I disagree with a lot of the literary critics, is that I find it to be an incredible novel as well about that same topic. In just a couple of interesting stats, in the Aeneid itself, Lavinia speaks not one line. I think you might have mentioned that earlier. She has no dialogue at all. And if you look back at the major epics, in the Iliad, Achilles has 1,281 lines and Hera has 327. In the Aeneid, Aeneas has 1,958 lines, and Dido, who many consider the main character in that epic, has only 231 lines of speech. And in Troilus and Crusade, Chaucer really makes an incredible difference, giving Crusade 1,154 lines and Troilus 1,662. Also in Troilus and Crusade, there were literally no scenes of battle at all, even though the entire poem was written while the Trojan War was going on. Most of it takes place in Troy while the war is going on. And Troilus is one of the greatest warriors in Troy, probably the second greatest warrior in Troy. So it's just the parallels between those two things I just wanted to mention.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray. And yeah, I mean, the numbers, they're quite striking, actually.
Incredibly striking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's as Le Guin says, she's not really rewriting in a reformative sense, but she's just letting someone free, letting someone be, and that is Lavinia, through both verse and novel form. The winners are still the men. I mean, the winners of the battles and everything else that happens. But she was a different type of hero, not in the winning sense, not because she survived or she won or she was victorious over somebody, but because she was able to come to herself by the end of the novel, to become someone she knows.
In the Lavinia novel itself, what is the balance between the battle scenes and other scenes? Does the battle scenes still predominate in that novel?
I mean, yes, not graphically, of course, but they're always in the background. Something is happening with Lavinia, either in Albanea during her visions or with Virgil during a dream or something. But they were always in parallel with some kind of war that is happening among invaders and tribes and everybody else that was in her land or around her land. So I think, and this is to contrast the internal and the external. So she was
Exactly.
having an internal battle, like, who am I? Tell me who I am, she asks Virgil. What is it that I should do? But I don't want to know what actually happens. So she is struggling to get to know herself. So it's a silent battle. It's an internal battle. Whereas the epic battles are happening around her. So her main aim was to stay safe, to keep her son safe, and to become and to see herself becoming.
Thank you. More question, please. Don't be shy. We are almost 70 from all over the world, from Europe to North America, South America, I think Israel as well. Okay, then I thank you very, very much, although tonight you were very shy. And I would like to say thank again to Roula Maria for being in the book, for being here with us. And I look forward, we look forward to meet you all again on May 17 with Niccolò Fiorentino Polipo. He is also featured in the book I mentioned earlier, and he will talk to us. Actually, he's the first one who used neo-Jungian in a title. And his paper is called False Start, a Neo-Jungian Critique of Self-Help. May 17, Bernard will be the host. Thank you very much. Good night, wherever you are around the globe.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Stefano. It was great fun and a great honor. And thank you again for bearing with the chapter. And if you have any other questions, if you would like to take this conversation further, please feel free to email me and I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Good night.
Bye.